We are going to start with this video on our integumentary system. The integumentary system is our first body system that we are going to take a look at in this course. The integumentary system has two major parts to it. The cutaneous membrane, which was one of those serous membranes that we actually discussed in Unit 1, and this contains both our epithelium at the surface as well as the connective tissue of the dermis that lies below the surface. The second part are the accessory structures, and these are things like the hair, the nails, and other exocrine glands that lie within it. Beneath the dermis, we have the epidermis, which is our epithelium. We have the dermis, that is the connective tissue. Beneath the dermis, we have a layer that is called the subcutaneous layer, or hypodermis. And this is actually what attaches the integument with everything that it contains to the muscles and bones that lie beneath. And its fibers are actually interwoven into the dermis. This is what kind of keeps our skin in place so that as we stretch and pull it, it moves, it moves with us and it doesn't move around us. You can also see where we get the term hypodermic needle here, because the hypodermic needles are meant to go into that layer. So it's meant to go through the outer two layers of the integument to the hypodermis level. You can actually see here, this is an overall generalized structure of the integument. We have the epidermis at the top here, which is our epithelial layer, the connective tissue layer of the dermis, and then the hypodermis below. Alright, the major functions of the integumentary system. The first one is protection from things like impacts, chemicals, infections, and loss of body fluids. The integumentary system also helps us regulate our temperature maintenance because it is what regulates the heat exchange with our outside environment. The integument also is responsible for nutrient synthesis and storage. So we're looking at nutrients like vitamin D3 as well as lipids. We also have sensory reception like touch, pressure, pain, and temperature. And we will go through some of these sensors when we actually get to the nervous system, but for right now, understand that these are the senses that we typically monitor. Keep in mind that touch and pressure are different. Touch is just the simple act of actually touching, whereas pressure is actually that pushing that you would feel. The last function is excretion and secretion. We secrete things like salts, water, and organic waste through our skin. And the organic waste is the same organic waste that we find in our urine. Now, it's not present in as high of quantities, but it is present. The things that we actually excrete through our skin are milk. Alright, so now that we've got kind of an overview of the integumentary system, let's start taking a look at the integument specifically. And we're going to start with the outer layer, which is the epidermis. The epidermis is made up of stratified squamous epithelial layers that contain no blood vessels. And if we look at the epidermis, we actually have two different types of epidermis. We have thick skin, which is made up of 5 different types of cell layers. Now, this doesn't mean that it's only 5 cell layers thick. What it means is that we have 5 different types of layers present. We find this thick skin at the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. And just to give you kind of a real-life comparison, thick skin, the epidermis of thick skin is about the thickness of a paper towel. Well, if we have thick skin, then obviously the second type is thin skin. And thin skin only has 4 of those different types of cell layers. Okay, this is found in the entire rest of the body. And again, for a thickness comparison, we find that it is about as thick as a plastic sandwich bag. So what I want to do is I want to go through these different groupings of cell layers, or what we call layers is often called strata, like rock strata, for instance. Okay. All right. The first strata or stratum for singular, is called the stratum germinativum. And this is sometimes, it gets its name because this is what we call the germ layer of our skin. This is the deepest layer within our epidermis. This is the cell layers that are attached to the basement membrane. Now, these form epidermal ridges, which actually interlock with the dermal papillae. And what I want to do is, I actually want to go quickly back and show you on the diagram here, okay? It's this waviness, okay? These little dips here are the epidermal ridges, and they interlock with the bumps, which are the dermal papillae. We get that interlocking of the two layers with that. So the epidermal ridges, and it's something that you kind of have to pay attention to, because we typically think of a ridge as something that extends upward. In this case, this ridge actually extends downward into the dermis. Let me get back a little bit easier here. Okay, so we've got these epidermal ridges which actually interlock with the dermal papillae. And these are important because that wavy layer gives us more surface area, and therefore we can get more nutrients diffusing into the epidermis. This pattern of the ridges actually goes all the way up to the skin surface itself. And what that does is it actually increases friction and allows us to grip things in our hands. The pattern of these ridges is actually genetically determined, so this is what creates our fingertip pattern. So as you can see, to get rid of that, it's going to be very, very difficult to do. Also in this layer is where we bury our stem cells, and these are the cells that allow our new cells to generate within the epidermis from here. In addition, we have specialized cells called melanocytes that we will talk about later, as well as receptors for touch are buried in the stratum germinativum. Again, we want to protect these cells from the outside, because if we damage them, for instance, the touch receptors are part of our nervous system and they will not regenerate. So that is the bottom or the base layer within our skin in the epidermis. The next layer of cells up is called the intermediate strata. This is actually a grouping of 3 different layers of cells. Again, remember, these are not a single cell layer thick, these are multi-cell layers thick. What happens as we move from the inner layers towards the outside, we get more specialization as we move outward. So how do these cells actually move from the inside to the outside? Well, the cell division from below actually pushes the cells out to the next layer. So the first layer within the intermediate stratum is called the stratum spinosum. This basically means the spiny layer. We can tell that these cells are still are in the stratum spinosum because they are still able to divide. So they're not those germ layer cells, but they are still ones that are able to divide. Now, the next layer, once they get pushed out into the next stratum, the stratum granulosum or grainy layer, they have stopped being able to divide. So that's kind of the key characteristic that differentiates them. Once they stop dividing, the cells immediately turn to production of a protein called keratin. And this keratin is very durable and water resistant. It gives a lot of the key features to our skin that we are familiar with. The last layer in that intermediate stratum is called the stratum lucidum. This is the layer of cells that we only find within thick skin. We would take a look at these cells and we would see that they are flattened and very densely packed cells. In addition, they are keratin filled. So at this point, they've pretty much jam-packed their cells with keratin. The last layer and the outer layer of cells is called the stratum corneum. This is the most superficial layer, so when you touch your outer layer of skin, or you touch your skin, you're actually touching your stratum corneum. This is made up of anywhere between 15 to 30 layers of very dead, flat cells. So in the stratum lucidum or the stratum granulosum, the cells actually die, and at that point they become part of the stratum corneum. These cells have very large amounts of keratin, and because of that we call them keratinized, or you can also call them cornified. And I throw that in there just so you can kind of see where the stratum corneum gets its name. These cells are cornified, so we call them the corneum layer. Remember, at this point they are also very tightly connected by desmosomes, so they shed in sheets, like with peeling. In addition, these cells are very dry. There's not a lot of moisture content within them. Now, just to give you an idea about a little bit more about the epidermis in general, it takes about 2 to 4 weeks to move a cell from the stratum germinativum to the stratum corneum. As it moves outward, it loses its oxygen and nutrient supply. So as it does so, it adds keratin, but then dies. The cells will stay in the stratum corneum about 2 weeks before they are washed away. So a cell can survive in the epidermis anywhere from between 4 to 6 weeks. Our epidermis also interacts with the sun because it is exposed to the environment. We know that our sun is able to damage our skin, but limited exposure to the sun can be beneficial. Cells that we have within the stratum spinosum and stratum germinativum use UV radiation to make a vitamin called vitamin D3. And this vitamin D3 is actually very important to us as humans. We have to have this vitamin D3 present within our digestive system so that we can absorb calcium and phosphorus that we need for our bone strength. If we don't have this vitamin D3, then we won't be able to absorb that calcium and phosphorus, and our bones will actually weaken. And we'll kind of talk about what happens with that when we get to the skeletal system. But this is one of the reasons why if you ever read the label on a bottle of milk, it will say that it has vitamin D added. And that is because we tend to limit our sun exposure now more as humans because we understand some of the dangers of sun exposure. So in order to ensure that we're able to absorb the calcium in milk products, they add that vitamin D in